Hello, welcome to Chapter 1 video lecture and quiz. My name is Dr. Yohe, and today we're going to be learning about the economic way of thinking. This class can be difficult to some people because we're doing something a little bit different. When you were in high school, or maybe some of the other classes you've had, somebody got up in front of you and read or paraphrased from a textbook and said, all right, repeat it back to me in your own words. And that's how they graded you. Oh, yeah, you get the concept. Okay. What I'm doing is a bit different. My profession doesn't allow me to just have you parrot back an answer to me. What I'm trying to do really is teach you how to think, teach you how to think like an economist. I am going to give you the rules or the laws of economics. And instead of parroting them back to me, along with some terms and definitions or whatever, I am going to have you use them to think about a problem, analyze it, and come up with a solution or evaluate a cause to that problem. To give you a simple example, let's say the next election comes up and a politician gets up and says, I want to have socialized healthcare or single payer healthcare. The government will pay everybody's medical bills. Now, you might sit there and think, oh, that sounds great. I'd love to have somebody else pay my medical bills. But what would happen in the market for medical care? Would medical care get better? Would it get worse? Would wait times be longer or worse? Those types of things. Where would we get the money to pay for this? Is there such a thing as government health care anyway? Who pays for it? Well, that's what you would think about as an economist. You'd use laws of economics, and you would come to conclusions and say, well, this will work or it won't work. This will create more problems in the healthcare market. This will solve problems in the healthcare market, whatever it is. Now, before we can ever do any of that, there's a lot of things we have to teach you that you didn't learn in school, high school, whatever. And we're going to look at those things. How do you know if something's true? Did you ever think about that? I mean, I could say anything. I could say, oh, if you pray to little green men on Mars, tomorrow prosperity will come if you did it right. Okay, is that true? Now, we would generally say, no, the answer is not true because there aren't any little green men on Mars. And even if there were, what do? They can't make prosperity for us. So we're going to look at those types of things. What does it mean to be true? How do we know things? We'll look at different types of propositions, okay, and evaluate how useful they are to us. And how do we know if those different things are true? So that's going to be exciting and interesting and something you've never had before. Other things we're going to talk about is what is science, what is economics, and whether or not economics is a science. Then we'll become more acquainted with the economic way of thinking. This video lecture doesn't cover everything in the PowerPoints or in the book or in the lectures. We're going to focus on certain things that I think you really need to know and that we'll have quizzes on later. So here, what is this economic way of thinking that your book likes to talk about? Your book says that it is a logical framework for organizing your thoughts and understanding economics. Now, this statement tells us a lot about the people that wrote this textbook. If you think about it, if you remember or if you were ever taught philosophy, if you go back in time, we had Socrates. Socrates was kind of the first main philosopher you're taught about. And Socrates had a problem. They killed him for scandalizing the youth of Athens. They killed him. Socrates, to the best of our knowledge, never wrote anything. We have no books written by him. All we know about what he said was through other philosophers, namely Plato. Now, Plato saw what happened to Socrates. He said, I don't think I want to end up like that. Okay, I don't think I want to end up like that. So a lot of what Plato wrote, he wrote, but in as if it came from Socrates. He would have a bunch of philosophers together, and Socrates would bring up a question, and they would debate it using the Socratic method, and then Socrates would come up with a solution to the problem. We don't know exactly, but generally that was Plato. Plato was writing as though Socrates said these things because he was already dead and they couldn't kill him again. So anyway, Plato was his main student, and then he had another one. Plato had a student named Aristotle, who we'll get to in a minute. Now, Plato had this thing called the theory of the forms, and he thought that before you were born, all of us, we lived in this netherworld, and in this netherworld, there were perfect things: a perfect man, perfect woman, perfect dog, perfect chair, perfect circle, perfect square, perfect triangle. Everything was perfect. Now, this wasn't heaven. The Greeks didn't believe in heaven, but he believed that you lived in this world with these perfect things. And that when you were born, you forgot about this nether world, but the forms of these things were burned into your mind: a perfect man, a perfect square, a perfect circle, perfect chair, perfect table, etc. Now, these forms, that's what we call them, exist in your mind. And Plato thought that when we saw something that was similar to them, we would attach this form to it and call it a circle or a square or a man or a woman or whatever it was. So here, Plato is saying that we impart the forms onto reality. So if we see something that looks symmetrical, is round all the way, we have this preconceived notion of a circle. It's already in our mind from that netherworld, and we impose circleness onto this thing. If I were to see you on the street and maybe you had long hair, delicate features, right? We could go into certain other things. I might impose femaleness onto you. If I saw you on the street and you had a long beard and you were big and whatever, I might impose manness onto you. Now the question is, does what we have in our minds, Plato would say, does it correspond to reality? So when I call something a circle, we could look at it. Now, by definition, a circle, if you take any point on a flat plane, measure an equal distance away from that plane, measure all the points that are, say, 1 inch away from that original central point that you picked. Plato would say, the definition would say that all of the points that are an exact equal distance away from some central point on that flat plane, that constitutes a circle. So every point on the outside of that circle, the circumference of that circle, is an exact equal distance from some central point that we started with. Now, if we were to go out and find something that you and I call a circle and measure it, we would find out that some points are a little further away from the central point, some are closer, etc. So in this case, when we call that thing a circle, does it actually correspond to a circle? Is it a circle? Many Platonists would say no, that we impart these forms onto reality where they don't exist. You could see this in modern politics today, for example, where people say, oh, you have to address me by some certain pronoun. Okay. So I look at you and I say, oh, you know, you feel these certain characteristics, and I call you a woman. I say, oh, she or her. This is her dog. And then the person comes and says, you're assuming my gender, right? That is a politeness idea. In essence, what this person is saying to you is that you are putting this form onto me. You're trying to fit me in this little box where I don't want to be, or I don't think I am, or I think I'm something else. Okay? So, in essence, these forms don't really mean anything in the real world. We call this thing a circle, but it's not a circle. We call somebody a woman, and this person says, no, I'm not a woman, even though all objective characteristics point to this person being a woman. Nope, I am a man. Okay, even though I was born a woman, I'm a man. I'm not a woman. So these people believe that we impart these forms onto reality where they might not otherwise be. So in reality, we can't know if anything's true. All we could say at best is that this statement conforms to reality, or reality conforms to what's in my mind when I say circle. But that's not enough. That's not really good. For example, let's say, ladies or guys, let's say you looked at, let's say a boyfriend's, or a girl asked her boyfriend, um, am I pretty? And the boyfriend says, well, you conform to pretty. Is he going to have a good night? Probably not. What she wants to hear is that my significant other, boyfriend, whatever, that when he looks at me, what he sees is identical to pretty, that I am pretty, not that I conform to pretty. That doesn't mean I'm pretty. I want him to say, yes, you are pretty. You are identical with pretty. That what is in you or your appearance does or is identical to pretty in my mind. So that brings us to Aristotle. Aristotle comes along and he says, all right, Plato was a great guy. He was my teacher. I learned a lot from him. But this whole theory of the forms thing is hooey. It's not correct. We never lived in a netherworld, or at least we certainly have no evidence or know of one that we lived in where this perfect forms existed. And we are born with a blank slate, according to Plato, tabula rasa. We are born with a sort of an empty mind that has a potential to learn these things, and that we do not get what we call these forms: maleness, womanness, circularity, squareness, rectangleness, triangleness, deskness. We don't get these forms from some netherworld and impart them onto reality. Instead, Plato says that these forms come from reality itself. So we might look at, say, the top of a peanut butter jar. We might look at um, a, a clock. We might look at, excuse me, we might look at a picture, and we might notice certain similarities or characteristics that are common to all of these things. We might notice that they have no straight lines, that they are curved all the way around the object, that they appear to be roughly symmetrical. Each point on the outside of, say, the peanut butter jar, the clock, and whatever the other thing was, the drawing, whatever, they all appear, every point on the outside of it appears to be roughly an equal distance from some central point. We notice these commonalities amongst things that we observe in reality, and we give that a name, these common characteristics. And in this case, we would call those things circles. We would say one of the things that's common in these things is that they are circles. Here, Aristotle says that what is in our minds, what we call a circle, is identical. It's the same as the things, the characteristics that exist in those objects that make them circles. This is a brilliant insight. It allows us to say that there are things in our mind that are true, that they are real. Plato thought that our minds and reality were separate, and that creates what we call the mind-body problem. Is what's in the mind the same thing that's in reality? The Platonists literally have to say no, we can't know. Right? You call this person a woman, that person says, nope, I'm a guy. I'm a chicken sandwich, whatever, but I'm not a woman. You can't go and argue and say, nope, you're a woman. You have certain physical characteristics. You have the DNA, you have 2 X chromosomes. You are capable of bearing children. You have certain, characteristics, right? A higher voice, whatever, anything, whatever they are. You're a woman. He can't say that. He says, well, I guess you could be a chicken sandwich. I don't know. Could be a man, I guess. So now we have this situation where people run around and asking, what are your preferred pronouns? Z, right? We don't know. And Aristotelian looks at all this stuff and says, you're insane. That's a woman. She's got 2 X chromosomes. She can bear children. She's got certain physical features, and biological features, certain whatever. That's a woman. You can't tell me she's a chicken sandwich, because a chicken sandwich has different characteristics than what I'm looking at and calling a woman. Chicken sandwich is square. You're not square. A chicken sandwich, you can, is made by a person out of grain and chicken. You're not made of grain and chicken. So that's the big difference. Aristotle said the mind is an object of reality. That my mind and what's in it is just as real as a clock or a dog or you. Therefore, things in the mind can be brought into a causal connection with things in reality. And by observing things, noticing similarities amongst them, we can identify those similarities with a name, circularity or a circle. And that what we say or observe as being a circle, if it meets those criterion, is a circle, and you don't argue about it. Now, the authors of your textbook here, they are friends of Plato. When we look at what science is, which we will in a few slides, we find out that people don't agree on what science is. Something that we've been practicing since the time of the ancient Greeks at least, you will find out we don't agree on it. Go and do an internet search, look up the word science, and find out how many don't find out because it'll take you too much time, but look at the fact that there are different definitions for it. We're going to go over some of them. The Aristotelians, on the other hand, have one definition for science, which we'll talk about. They don't differ. So one version of science that comes from Plato is what I call the theory cabinet. the filing cabinet theory of science. To these people, our minds are like a filing cabinet. And inside those minds are these forms. Think of them as just files in the filing cabinet. We have maybe a little transparency in there, right? And we look at something and we go through the filing cabinet. We hold these transparencies up here. Does it conform to this? Does it conform to that? Does it conform to this? Oh, here, it conforms to that. I'm going to call you a circle. Call that a circle, okay? And that we take these observations from reality and we file them. So I saw this round thing and I call it a circle. I put that in the circle file. I see, say you're a young lady, I see you out in the town. I hold these transparencies up, these forms. I find one you conform to, and I say, oh, you're a woman, and I put you in the woman file, this observation. So maybe another one's a guy. I look at him, oh, yeah, fits that one, you're a guy. Okay? So to them, we're imposing these forms onto the things that we observe, where they might not otherwise be. So that creates a problem, the mind-body problem. Is what is in my mind true? Does it conform or is it identical with reality? The Platonists can't know. So to them, the economic way of thinking is a logical framework for organizing your thoughts and understanding economics. Now, those words are important. The filing cabinet, those are things we use to organize things. So I see you on the street and you see you're a young lady, I put you in the woman file or in the man file. I'm organizing my observations, okay? And through this organization, this logical framework, which I'm organizing things in, I try to understand reality. Now, understanding and knowing are two different things. In philosophy, understanding, one of the words that they use for that is verstehen. Verstehen is a German word, means understanding. There, let's say you were in-class student and you were late one day. And I come into class, you're not there, you walk in while I'm lecturing. Everybody who has my online class, my regular classes knows that if someone comes to my class late, I make fun of them. Okay, if their hair's messed up, I'll say, your hair looks bad. What, you didn't comb your hair? It's not important enough to comb your hair? What are you, a slob? I'll make fun of you. Now, let's say the student comes in. He says, hold on, before you make fun of me. You don't understand why I'm late. And he says, there was a horrible accident on the freeway. I saw a burning car. I stopped. I heard a cry. There was a baby in the back seat. I jumped into the back seat of the car. I rescued the crying baby, and I pulled him out right before the car exploded. I saved his life. Now, in that case, if that were true, I could understand why you were late to my class, and I wouldn't make fun of you. I might say, oh, you're a hero. So let's say the student tells me this story. Do I know that it's true? Is it true? I didn't see the car. I didn't see the fire. I didn't see the student. I didn't see the baby. So I don't know that he rescued the baby. But I could understand why a person who did that would be late. So knowing and understanding are two different things. The question is, through a Platonic framework, if we were to believe that we had forms that pre-existed in our minds and that we imposed them onto reality, could we know what's in our mind is true out there in reality? And philosophers have been trying to solve this problem forever, those that adhere to the Platonic view. Now, there are other views on what science is. This one comes to us from a man named St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas, maybe you've heard of him, maybe you haven't. This is one of the problems with government, public schools, and even a lot of private schools. He is probably the, if not one of the cornerstones of Western civilization. The lives that we live, the way that we think, a lot of the things that we do, what we believe, a lot of these things come from St. Thomas Aquinas. Yet most people don't even know who he is. He was born the third son of the Count of Aquine. Aquine is a region in Italy. Here's a map. There's about roughly where St. Thomas was from. If you look, he was born in 1225. This is back during the Middle Ages. Okay. Now, St. Thomas was the third son of the Count of Aquine. Back in the Middle Ages, they had something called primogeniture and entails. Primogeniture means that your oldest son is your heir. And entails means you can't break your estates up. So any land or titles that you had as an aristocrat, all of that went to your firstborn son. Now, if you had a horse or some money, you could maybe give that to the other kids. But all of your property and all of your noble titles went to your son. Now, the Count of Aquine was a very important man. He was involved in a very important county there in Italy, and that's where we get the name. The land that is ruled by a count is called a county, and that's where we get the word county here, like Etowah County. So anyway, he was also a relative of the Holy Roman Emperor, a man who was neither holy nor Roman. He was a German. Okay, this is well after the fall of Rome, about 700 years. The Holy Roman Empire at that time composed areas that are now modern-day France, Germany, Austria, parts of most of Italy, parts of what's formerly Czechoslovakia, Poland, all these others. But it was an empire. Now, Thomas, being the third-born son, was not going to inherit noble titles or land, but was still a member of the aristocracy, still a nobleman. If you were a nobleman in the Middle Ages, there were certain things you could do for a living, and the rest you couldn't do at all. You couldn't be involved in commerce. You couldn't be a businessman. They thought that was dirty or beneath them. Basically, you could be a farmer. You could be in agriculture, but it's hard to be in agriculture if you don't have any land because your brother got it all. You could be in the military. You could be a knight. In fact, the second son of the Count of Aquine was a knight. Okay, soldier, go in the military. You could go into government. You could be an advisor or work in a royal court or something like that. Or you could go into the priesthood. You become a religious person. So Thomas's parents decided that he was going to become a priest. Not just any priest. They had a specific plan for him. Nearby was the Abbey of Monte Cassino, which was a monastery. This was a very famous monastery. It was actually established by Saint Benedict himself, and it was a Benedictine monastery. Now, his uncle was the head abbot at Monte Cassino, and Thomas's parents wanted him to become a Benedictine monk and eventually succeed his uncle as head of the abbey, as the head abbot. Now, Benedictines, if you know anything about the history of the church, were one of the first monastic orders. Everybody in the church had a role, and in this case, the Benedictines' role was to work and to pray. The Benedictine monasteries could not accept charity. They couldn't accept charitable gifts. Instead, the monks had to work to feed, clothe, and house themselves. So they would wake up in the morning. They would do their morning office, right? They would pray, do certain things, maybe go to mass, go eat. Then they would go out and work. They'd grow food or crops. They'd manufacture goods. They might make cloth. Many of the monasteries made their own beer or wine. Most famous European beers and a lot of the wines are originally made in monasteries by monks. Back then, you couldn't drink the water; you'd die. So they had to make wine or beer out of it to drink. They might raise animals. They might raise their own cattle. Now, these monks could read and write, and they were literate. They were the ones in European society who wrote and write, who read and wrote, read and could write. Sorry, and they knew a lot of things. In fact, these monasteries were actually economic engines in the Middle Ages. People would come to the monasteries to live around the monks, to learn agricultural techniques, animal husbandry, manufacturing techniques. And these big monasteries, or little ones, either way, they became huge engines of economic growth in the Middle Ages, sort of technology hubs. Now, Thomas was sent as a child to this abbey to study and learn. And when he was at the age of 12, the monks brought him back to his parents. And they said, "I'm sorry. He knows everything that we know. There's nothing left that we can teach him. He needs to go to college. He needs to go to university." Now, this is a time when most people were illiterate, and very few, if any, people ever got to go to a university. And here Thomas is as a 12-year-old being recommended to go to college by some of the most learned men in all of society. So his parents sent him to the University of Naples at the age of 12 in the Middle Ages. And at that time, this university was fairly new. It was set up by a Norman ruler. The Normans were Vikings who had settled into France. They eventually, in 1066, conquered England, okay, and parts of Europe. They were great warriors, fantastic knights, some of the best knights in Europe. And they had conquered southern Italy. And I'm not sure if it was Roger, but one of the Norman rulers had established the University of Naples. So Thomas goes to school there, and while he's at school there, he learns of a newer monastic order called the Dominicans. The Dominicans were followers of. So anyway, St. Thomas went to college. He discovered this new order called the Dominicans. The Dominicans had a different role within the church. Instead of to work and to pray, the Dominicans' job was to preach and to teach. You can imagine Europe in the Middle Ages. There are many little numerous towns and villages that might not have a priest. A lot of times these Dominicans would go on routes throughout Europe, each time stopping in a town that didn't have a priest or whatever, and preaching. Now, the Dominicans could not own property. They were paupers. And thus, especially these priests that went on the traveling tours, they would have to beg for their daily bread. So they were known as what we call a mendicant order or a begging order. Their other job was to teach at the church universities throughout Europe. And there weren't very many, but there were. So Thomas wants to be a Dominican, and his father forbids it. His father says, "There's no way a son of mine, the son of the Count of Aquino, an important important count and relative of the Holy Roman Emperor himself. There's no way that my son is going to be in a begging order. Well, as Thomas finishes up university, his father dies. His father had died. His brother was now the count, his oldest brother, but the power behind the throne, so to speak, was his mother. And Thomas decides he's going to become a Dominican against his mother's wishes. When he does, the Dominicans in Naples realize he's too hot of a potato. His family's too powerful for them to handle. So they send him up to Rome, where he's under the protection of the head of the order and the Pope himself. And Thomas's mother is coming to get him. Now, you can imagine if your mom came into one of my classes to get you. She would come in there with that mom look. She'd stomp in there. We'd all get out of the way. She'd grab you by the ear, pull you out. We wouldn't do a thing. We're afraid of moms. Now, you've got Thomas's mother coming up, except she's not just going to do that. She actually has an army with her. And she's going to get her son. So the Pope and the head of the Dominican order realize he's too hot of a potato for them to handle. And they're going to send him to the University of Paris, the top university in all of Europe. So they send him on the road to Paris. Thomas's mother realizes they might do this. She stations her sons with some men on the road out of Rome into Paris, and they capture and kidnap Thomas. They beat him, they rip his robes off, they tie him to the back of a mule, and they bring him back home. And his mother has him locked in a tower, just like Rapunzel, except he isn't. You can see here. Stop that. He doesn't have the hair. So he's locked in this tower. His brothers torment him. You can imagine if you have older brothers. I'm an older brother, but if you can imagine you had older brothers and your mom, who's the only one that ever kept you alive with them, said, okay, he's free game. You can imagine what they would do. But his sisters are kind to him. They bring him food and books to read. Word of what has happened to Thomas reaches the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor himself, and they are about to order his mother to let him go. His mother, instead of letting him go under threat of the Pope and the Emperor, the two most powerful people in all of the Middle Ages in Europe, instead of allowing him to leave to go be a Dominican, we think they sort of arranged his escape. His sisters lower him down in a basket. If you can look, he's kind of a big guy. They lower him down in a basket to some waiting Dominicans, and they rush him off to Paris, at the University of Paris. Now, at the University of Paris is probably the preeminent intellectual of the times, a man named Saint Albert the Great. He didn't give himself that name. So he is probably the top intellectual in Europe, maybe ever in Europe. And he has Thomas in his class, and Thomas is sort of his student. And one day the students are making fun of Thomas. He was kind of awkward. You might have trust issues, if your mom had locked you in a tower for a couple of years. He's kind of chubby and he's very quiet and he's just an awkward guy. So they make fun of him. They gave him a nickname. They called him the dumb ox. Here's a person who at the age of 12, some of the most learned people in all of Europe, bring you back home and say, no, you got to go to university. At the age of 12, he knows everything we know. And they're calling him the dumb ox. Well, one day, St. Albert looks up from his notes or whatever while they're teasing him in class. He looks up and he says, today, you call him the dumb ox. But someday, he wags his finger at him, I'm sure. So you can see mine. There you go. But someday, what he thinks we'll all think, and what he believes we'll all believe. And for the most part, St. Albert was right. St. Thomas goes on to write numerous books on philosophy. Starts his own branch of philosophy called Thomism. He also writes massive books on theology. and he is the main theologian of the Catholic Church. Even if you're not Catholic or Christian, you still have to deal with St. Thomas. Now, the important part for us is that after the fall of the Roman Empire in the West, about 500 AD, we lose Aristotle in the West, and all we have left is something called Neoplatonism. And just to give you an example, St. Augustine, you've all heard of him. He was a Neoplatonist. We get it from him. So Aristotle's lost in the West. The eastern half of the Roman Empire survives. They have Greece in it. Aristotle still lives in the East, but not in the West. Around 700 AD, a man named Muhammad forms his own religion called Islam and goes on to conquer most of the eastern half of the Roman Empire, North Africa, and what is now modern-day Spain. When he does this, the Muslims inherit Aristotle. And there are numerous works by Muslim, Jewish philosophers inside of the Islamic Empire continuing to work in this Aristotelian or Aristotle's tradition. And they go to Spain, and Spain becomes a great center for learning. Now, in 742, I believe, I'm not 100% sure on the date, the Muslims invade Aquitaine, which is a region in France. So they invade Aquitaine, and the Duke there, a guy named Duke Odo, sometime vassal of the Merovingian Empire, which is the Germanic Empire in Germany and France. He goes to Charles Martel, or Charles the Hammer Martel, and says, hey, bygones be bygones. If you don't help me, the Muslims from Spain are going to conquer Europe, and especially Aquitaine. So Charles agrees to help him. He has a professional army of infantry. The Germans and Western Europeans had lost the stirrup, so they had no mounted warriors. He sneaks down to near Aquitaine, a place called Tours, and fights against the Muslim invaders. It's called the Battle of Tours, or the Battle of Poitiers. Anyway, Martel, against huge odds, somehow defeats the invading Muslim army. It's one of the key battles in history. Martel, as we said before, had no mounted cavalry. He had an infantry-based army. The Muslims had the stirrup, and they had mounted cavalry. Martel, despite mounted cavalry charges and only having an infantry-based army, defeats the Moors in one of the most important battles of history. There are only a few battles in history, I think 3, where a infantry-based army is able to withstand a mounted cavalry charge. One of them was in the movie Braveheart. It's actually a recreation. But the Battle of Stirling Bridge, in the movie, they find those big long poles. They chop down those trees and sharpen the edges and hide them. And then when the warriors come, they bring the big poles up and stab the horses and the riders. But Martel defeats the Moors at Tours. From then until 1492, an important date, begins what we call, or engages, or is what we call the Reconquista of Spain takes place. It's the Christian reconquest of Spain. And eventually, in 1492, King Ferdinand and the most Catholic monarch, Isabella, defeat the Moors and push the Muslims out of Spain by defeating the Kingdom of Granada. It is in 1492 that Columbus, if you'll remember, begins his voyage to discover America. He could not have done that, nor could the Spanish monarchs have funded that until after they had pushed the Moors out of Spain. So it's kind of an interesting date there. But anyway, when the Christians would conquer a town from the Moors, they would discover universities and libraries and books. And in these libraries were books by Aristotle. Now, the Christians didn't know what to do with the books. Here is a book written by a pagan philosopher, Aristotle, and carried on, the tradition carried on by heretic philosophers. The Christians viewed the Muslims as heretics. What should we do with the books? Should we burn them or should we keep them? Are they good or are they bad? Are they Christian or anti-Christian? St. Albert the Great and as his student Aquinas are given access to the works, and they, along with some other scholars, come to the conclusion that we should keep the books, that the books are good. We can use them and the logic provided by Aristotle to discover more about the world around us and God's plan for us, or our relationship with God. The books are Christian because we can use them to discover truths about God. So the books are kept, and the Aristotelian brand of philosophy is spread throughout Europe. Without St. Thomas, we don't have that. Now, he, going along with this Aristotelian tradition, came up with a definition for science. He says that science is the discovery of things, their natures, and the relationships between things. Now, if you think about science, that's not a bad idea. We go out in the world, say a biologist goes to the rainforest to discover things. He sees something scurry in a bush, he runs after it, picks it up, looks at it, and sees a slow-moving animal with long claws. It's kind of stupid, right? And he identifies that as maybe a sloth. Then he looks at it even further, and this is its nature along with that. He's found the animal, now he's looking at their nature. He discovers that it has 3 toes. Every other sloth we've seen has 4 or 5 toes. In that case, he would classify the sloth as his own species, the 3-toed sloth. Then we discover the relationship between those things and other things. So maybe we go back out in the rainforest, find 1,000 of these sloths, and we never find one with cancer. Every other animal we found cancer in them. Here we can't find one with cancer. Then we might want to study the relationship between that sloth and cancer. Maybe we do a blood sample and we find out that this sloth has some chemical in its blood that no other animal has, and all these other animals get cancer. Then we might want to see the relationship between this chemical and cancer cells. Maybe we put it in a petri dish with healthy cells and some cancer cells and go back and look at it, and it kills off all the cancer cells, but the healthy cells aren't affected by it. Then we might find our silver bullet or magic bullet cure for cancer. So for our class and for our intensive purposes, we're going to stick with this definition that science is the discovery of things, their natures, and the relationships between things. Other definitions exist out there. We're going to go with St. Thomas. Again, from Plato, friends of Plato here, we get one that a lot of economists like, and this comes from Milton Friedman. He says the ultimate goal of a positive science is the development of theory or hypotheses that yields valid and meaningful, i.e. not truistic predictions about phenomena not yet observed. We also call this positivism. Here, Friedman is saying that science is prediction. A theory or a scientific theory is good or scientific if if it predicts well. If it doesn't predict well, it's a poor or not a scientific theory. He's also saying another thing, and that is that the assumptions in our theory don't have to be true. In fact, they aren't true. That does not invalidate the theory. You can have untrue assumptions, things you know aren't true in your theory, but if that theory predicts well, it's a good theory. Whether or not the assumptions behind it are true or false. Now, I don't agree with this because I think that it doesn't adequately define science. The scholastics, who are people that follow on from St. Thomas, he creates this scholastic school of followers of his. They call themselves the scholastics. They have an idea on what a definition is. They say a good definition should include all of the things you think about when you think about a term and exclude all the things you don't think about. Now, let's take mythology. Zeus is a god on Mount Olympus. When Zeus gets mad, he throws lightning bolts down onto the earth. If you blaspheme Zeus, that will cause lightning bolts to hit the earth. That is an untrue theory because there is no Zeus. There's nobody up on Mount Olympus. We've been up there. There are no gods up there. But would that be a good scientific theory? I will bet you every time somebody blasphemes Zeus, a lightning bolt strikes the earth somewhere. Could it be a good predictor? If every time someone says, "Damn you, Zeus," a lightning bolt hits the earth, that sounds like a good predictor. But is it science? No, it's mythology. Friedman's definition would not exclude mythology or superstition from science. Another definition you might find is that science is the use and application of the scientific method. Now, of course, here, if in order for something to be scientific, we have to use the scientific method, right? Develop a theory, form a hypothesis from that theory, form a test, perform the test, compare the evidence with our hypothesis, and either reject or fail to reject our hypothesis, and thus our theory. If in order for something like that, or for something to be scientific, you had to use the scientific method on it, we could ask, does the scientific method apply to itself? Is the scientific method itself scientific? And the answer is no, you cannot test the scientific method. Therefore, if we use that as a definition of what's scientific, the scientific method itself is just a method. It's not scientific at all. All of these Platonic views, in my opinion, lead to nihilism. Nihilism is the belief that we don't know anything about reality. Okay? We're just sort of imposing structural forms, these forms, onto reality where they aren't or might not be, and we have no way of knowing it. If that were the case, then we should just shut our mouths and stop trying to do science, because we have no idea if it's correct or not. The next thing, what is economics? Economics, according to a man named Lord Lionel Robinson, we're going to add to this definition so it's not completely correct, is the science that deals with the relationship between scarce means that have alternative uses, including time and one's own physical body, and ends. Now, what this says here is that as economists, we deal with what we call means and ends relationships. Means are the things that you use to accomplish your goal. So if your goal were to pass this class, these PowerPoints, your time, the pencils and pens that you use to take notes, the textbooks that you read, those would all be means, including this video, that we use to accomplish our goal of passing this class. An economist would evaluate whether or not those means are capable of accomplishing your goal. Another example, let's say, Donald Trump came out and said, I have this great plan. I want to eliminate poverty. That's his goal. Okay, I could perk my ears up to that one. You want to eliminate poverty? Okay, I'm willing to listen. What do you got? Then he would explain his means. He'd say, all right, we're going to line everybody up, richest to poorest. We're going to determine who's poor, and then we're going to shoot all the poor people. Now, an ethicist would evaluate whether or not his means were good or bad. In this case, trust me, they're bad. Shooting poor people is bad. I know none of you believe that, but it is. Don't shoot poor people. It's bad. But they would evaluate whether or not the means and the ends are good or bad. Okay? And if I were an ethicist, I'd say, well, your goal of ending poverty is good. We'd like to see that, but your means are bad. Okay? And I would say that the ends don't justify the means. Doing bad things to try and accomplish a good goal is not a good thing. As an economist, I would say, will shooting all the poor people eliminate poverty? And the answer to that question is no, it's a horrible policy. If we shoot all the poor people, they buy and sell things and work for people who are not poor. If they're dead, all those things disappear. In that case, fewer things would be produced, more people would fall from being non-poor into the poor range. We have to shoot them, and eventually Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, whoever it is now, would in the end would have to shoot himself in the head, and we'd eliminate mankind from existence if we shot poor people. Everyone would become poor and then dead. So that's what Robbins says. A man named Ludwig von Mises expands upon this. He says that economists don't evaluate all ends and means relationships, but that we involve those ends and means relationships that involve economic calculation, or what Mises calls catalactics. That is where we can attach a money value to the means or the costs, established costs, and compare them to the benefits or revenues of an action. So if I wanted to expand, let's say expand my factory, and I believe if I expand the factory, that will create $1 million more in widgets that I produce, that I'll sell. So I'll gain $1 million in money for the widgets I sell. I would then want to evaluate that against the cost of expanding the factory. Let's say it would cost me $800,000 now to expand the factory, and in 1 year I will have $1 million in widgets sold. Is that a good deal? Should I do that? That is catalactics, and it's known as profit and loss calculations. Okay. Other ends and means relationships that do not involve economic calculation would fall within the sphere of sociology. Sociology typically includes family interactions, drugs, crime. Does a mother say, well, we've got $100 in a checkbook. My husband asked for a new golf club. My son asked for a new bicycle. Where should I spend the $100? Does she do an economic calculation and say, well, if I buy the golf club for my husband, he'll be happier. He'll make $1,000 more this year at work. On the other hand, if I buy the bicycle for my child, he'll be happier. Maybe he'll do an extra $100, $110 worth of housework around the house. And say, well, $1,000 for the golf club minus the 100, it's a $900 profit. 110 minus $100 for the bike, only a $10 profit if I buy the bike. I'm getting my husband the golf club. No, the mother says, well, my child's happiness is more important than anything else, so I'm going to buy the bike, and I'm not going to buy the golf club with the money. That is not an economic calculation, and that would fall within the field of sociology. Thank you for listening. We will have one more video here with a quiz, but this one's gone an hour and I don't want to keep going, so I'll make a second video. Thank you and goodbye.